All right, welcome to part two of Praise Covenant's Money by Design series. We are going to do a quick recap of our last class and then jump into today's material. So, in our first class, we focused on credit, covering how credit cards actually work, what's the best way to make sure your utilization of those credit cards is correct to increase your score, to make sure that not only is your score kept at a good spot, but your debt is kept low as well. We talked about how parents can add their minor children to a credit card when they're under 18. And by the time they're 18, they will have had X number of years of history, which is extremely beneficial. We talked about the different parts of a FICO score, or your credit score, what that is. Talked about common mistakes that people usually make with credit. And then we lastly talked about keeping your utilization under or within that 10 to 30% range. So today we're going to get into how to build on some of those concepts in a way that allows you to not just better your credit, but use that credit and some of these same concepts to put you in a better position financially. So, one of the first things we're going to cover is why investing matters. I know this might seem a little bit basic or rudimentary, but a lot of people have misconceptions about investing. I know growing up, my parents didn't invest actively. They said investing was gambling. There's all kind of misconceptions people have. That's the most common one, that if you invest, you're gambling because the stock market could go up or it can go down and you don't want to take the risk, so you just store cash in a savings account that makes 0.3% a year, which is pathetic. So we're going to talk about why that's not the case and get into what investing actually is. So a lot of times when people hear about investing, they usually conflate it with trading and they think of fast moving charts that are going all over the place. They think about the movies where people lose it all, again, like they're in Vegas. But that's just not the reality. Investing is extremely important. They just did a survey within the last 6 months of people between, I want to say it was 21 and 34, and it was found that investing is the not just the quickest, but the most secure way for people to become millionaires. And that sounds out of reach for a lot of people, but we'll get into how you can make that doable for yourself. It will require some planning, it'll require some discipline, but it is absolutely doable. Um, One of the reasons you'll hear people when they talk about investing, why they harp on it so much is because if all you do is store cash, like let's say you have the infamous cash under the mattress, or you just keep your money in a savings account at your local bank, whatever that is. What happens then is that cash every single year gets eaten up by inflation. So let's say in 2000 I had $100 in my savings account. By the time 2005 hits, that $100 is worth 80, $90. And it just keeps going down. The worth of that cash continues to decrease every year. So while yes, you may have $1,000 in your savings account from 10 years ago, that $1,000 is not going to stretch like it would have 10 years ago. So essentially, you're losing money by just keeping it in a savings account or just keeping cash. Not to say you shouldn't have any in savings or any in cash, but that shouldn't be your main investment mode of investment. Because, like I said, with the inflation, your purchasing power shrinks. As I'm sure we've all noticed, gas goes up, groceries are infinitely more expensive than they were just a few years ago. So every time prices go up, every time inflation creeps up, our purchasing power goes down. So again, if all we have is cash or a savings account that's giving us 0.1, 0.2% a year of interest, we're literally losing money by it sitting there. Um, so that's why you'll hear people talk about having exposure to the market. Um, there are a number of concepts, a number of ways you can approach it. We'll start with some of the more basic ones. If we do some more classes, we might get into more complex strategies to use, but for now we'll keep it relatively elementary just to get the foundation down. So um, the biggest thing that you'll hear about investing is time in the market beats timing the market. And that leads us into our next slide, which is talking about ETFs and dollar cost averaging. So before I get into those, finishing that thought for time in the market. And we'll get into this a little later as well. But a lot of people think that when you invest, you have to sit there and look at charts for 12 hours a day. You have to sit there and research companies, look over their entire financial report for the last 12 years, all these kind of crazy things. While, yes, if you're trying to be a professional trader, you want to be a professional in the investment field, of course, you have to do your homework and put in the time and discipline as anybody else would for their field. But for most people, you don't need to do that. Really, the biggest benefit that you can give yourself is length of time in the market. So the longer that you are invested in the stock market, or if you do crypto, whatever you're investing in, the longer you're in that market, the better your investments will be. And talking about some of the simple ways that you can invest, uh, the one that I usually recommend to people the most is called an ETF. An ETF is an exchange traded fund. And I'll give a quick definition. So, an ETF essentially, instead of having just a single stock, like you'll hear people talk about Apple or Microsoft, they talk about a lot of the tech stocks now, Nvidia, all the other ones that we have that are going crazy. Those are individual stocks. An ETF or an exchange traded fund that has multiple companies in the fund that you're investing in. So if it's a tech fund, it might have Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia all together. It'll usually have some smaller tech companies in there as well. But what that does is it gives you instant diversification into the top companies in that field. So instead of you having to do all the research and try to find the next big thing and maybe take some swings and misses, which you will do if you invest and you get really into it, you will have some misses. Um, but what this allows you to do is get exposure to all these top companies in whatever field that ETF covers. And that improves your odds of having successful investments. The people that run ETFs, I mean, this is what they do for a living. They're massive companies. Not to say that they have everybody's best interest at heart, but it is an extremely good and easy way to get your foot in the door and start investing. Now, a little bit more background on what an ETF is, or why it may be beneficial to do that versus trying to find individual stocks to invest in, is because, like, let's say I invest $100,000 in Apple, and the next month after I invest, it has an atrocious month. They get hit with some crazy antitrust lawsuit. They get the pantsuit off of them, and their stock drops by 50%. So my 100,000 I invested the next month is worth 50,000. Can that happen? Yes. How you avoid such a negative impact is if you had an ETF investment. Let's say Apple is part of that ETF, and I had that $100,000 invested. The increase of the stock prices of the other companies, if they're going up and Apple goes down, it offsets the loss for Apple. So again, that diversification protects your investments. I mean, is that usually something that happens so dramatically? No. But just as a dramatic example to give you a mental picture as to the benefit of investing in an ETF, it does provide a little bit of a safety net. And again, this is an excellent tool, investment tool, if you're just starting out, or maybe you don't really want to spend a ton of time learning how to invest in all the specifics and ins and outs and complexities, but you still want you to make your money work. If your money's not working, you will remain working. So it's either you work or your money works. And this is a really great way to get your money working. And it's a beginner friendly one that again you don't have to have tons of time invested into figuring out all the specifics of the companies. Now you may ask what ETFs are a good investment. Of course, right now, as you're seeing, tech is going crazy, AI is going crazy. Um, so those are always good. They do have a little bit more volatility, which means sometimes it can jump up, sometimes it might drop a little bit. So that's something to consider if you're investing for long term. You don't mind having some volatility in your portfolio because volatility means while it does have a chance that it could drop, the volatility means that it has a really good chance that it could also shoot up. So that's kind of the educated guess that you're taking in those scenarios when you deal with stocks or ETFs that have a little bit of volatility. Now, they have ETFs that cover the energy sector, so oil and whatnot. Um, those are always good as well. They're stable. They don't provide as much in the way of gains, but they are a little bit more stable. So some people go that route. Maybe if they're a little bit older and they can't take as many risks currently. That's another strategy. So a couple ways you can do that. I can't get into too much. I can't make specific recommendations because that goes into financial advice and that's illegal. So we'll stay out of there. But I can answer general questions. So if you have some of those at the end, we can get into that. And then lastly, on this slide, people ask about how they can start their investment. So let's say you figured out an ETF that you wanted to invest in, and it's a tech ETF, and that's what you decided to go with. And so your next question is, okay, how do I invest in it? How much do I invest? How frequently do I invest? And the all-time easiest strategy is called dollar cost averaging or DCA. This means that you just make a consistent investment either every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever that looks like, whatever your schedule is, you're making that same investment every single time. And the idea behind this is you have it automated. Because as we all know, if it's not automated, there's a chance that we can just, I don't really feel like investing this month. And then that becomes a habit. You miss 1 month, 2 months. Next thing you know, 6 months later, you haven't invested. So the best strategy is to automate it. That could be through your job. You can have your retirement come straight out of your check. You can do it with any brokerage that you have. So let's say you have Charles Schwab, not endorsing them, but that's just what came to mind. You can also set up automated withdrawals with any of the brokers, and it'll go into whatever you selected. Now, what are the benefits of DCA, and why do I tell everybody to do this if they're not planning on becoming a professional investor or trader? So dollar cost averaging, one, as I just mentioned, it eliminates you being able to not make the investment manually that month because it's automated. Secondly, what it does is it takes away the guesswork of you trying to invest when that stock is at the lowest so you can get the most gain out of it. A lot of people try to time the market, meaning, like, again, using Apple. If they want to invest in Apple, they're going to try to figure out when Apple is going to hit the lowest price possible before they invest their money. But you never know when the bottom is going to hit. It could start going down a couple bucks and you're like, oh, it's on the way. And then 2 hours later, it shoots up 20 bucks per share. So you don't want to time the market. It's impossible to do. Yes, you can make some excellent educated guesses, but you do have to put quite a bit of time and effort into learning that skill. It's an extremely valuable skill, but it does take a lot of investment of your own time to be able to learn. So if you're not there or if you don't plan on going there, I would strongly recommend just using the dollar cost average method. Invest the same amount every 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, whatever that looks like for you and your situation. But the second thing that does, and probably more importantly, is it allows you to have time in the market. And the next slide is going to explain why that's so important. So compound interest. I'm not sure if anybody has heard that term, if they're familiar with it. But compound interest and compounding gains is by far the most major of the benefits of investing every month or every week, every 2 weeks, again, whatever your schedule is. The more you invest and the longer you invest, the better your returns on that investment are. Now, compound interest, just to give kind of a oversimplified definition, it's when you get interest, or you, let's say, the share that you're invested in, the stock you're invested in, has dividends that it pays out. So meaning if their stock does well, they give their investors X amount of dollars. Whenever you do that, you have your interest just compounding every month, every year, or you have your dividends compounding. They get reinvested back into whatever you're invested into. That does wonders for your balance. And I'll give a quick example. So let's say they start investing at 18 and they retire at, what's the usual age? I think it's like 63 now. So that's about 45 years worth of investment. Um, let's say the interest rate is 8%, because that's pretty, or not interest rate, the rate of return, excuse me, is 8%. That's a pretty standard, a little bit high on some years, but it's not something that it would be considered unattainable. So if on average they're earning 8% on their investment over those 45 years, that's about 5 times that their investment's going to double. So their $1 that they invested at 18, 45 years later will be worth about $32. Now, if you were to take that same person and instead of starting at 18, they started at 28 and went through 63, that would be 35 years. So it cut 10 years off. That $1, instead of being worth $32 approximately, it would be worth about $16. So just 10 years less of investing from 18 to 63, or 28 to 63, that cuts what their investment turns into by half. And again, that's because every time your investments increase, the share prices increase, or your dividends go up, whatever that return is that you're getting, when that continues to compound, it does, again, wonders for your value, wonders for your bottom line. And that's why I stress to people that ask about investing, time in the market is infinitely more important than timing the market. So the time that you are invested versus trying to find the best price for your investment, you may get lucky here and there, but your best, most consistent and safest strategy would just be to dollar cost average every month and start investing as early as you can. And so this doesn't just apply to adults though. So if you're not an adult or you have kids, start an investment account for them and put X number of dollars in there every month. By the time your kid's 18, their compounded interest or their compounded gains, again, whatever you're investing in, it's going to look a little bit different, will have grown exponentially by the time that they're 18, and they'll be in such a much better position than most of us were when we hit 18. Most of us just got a pat on the back and a good luck. So if you want to put your kids in a better position financially, this is an excellent strategy to use. And like I said, it's very easy, very beginner friendly. There is nothing extremely special you have to do. It's just being consistent with what you're doing. And lastly, on this subject, a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, I haven't started investing because I don't have a lot to invest. And that is irrelevant. Like I just talked about, time in the market is king. So regardless of what you have to invest now, The most important thing is to start. If you never start, you'll never see the gains. And some people are like, well, I only have 25 bucks a month to invest. Then invest 25 bucks a month. Get started. And then in 6 months, you double that to 50 bucks a month. In another 6 months, you can bump that to 100 bucks a month. Whatever your personal financial schedule looks like, whatever that roadmap looks like, just start. I cannot emphasize that enough. Um, and people are like, oh, well, what if somebody, that other person, they're investing $1,000 a month. This other person's investing $30,000 a month. Fantastic for them, but who cares? Your journey is your journey. And if you're at 25 bucks a month, that is what it is, but you need to start. You'll never get to that 30K if you never start at the 25. So I really want to emphasize that time in the market, the more time your money is invested, the better chances you have of making exponential gains with that money. So start as soon as you can. Um, with that being said, talking about some beginner investing strategies, I know we already talked about ETFs, so I'm going to get into that just a little bit more. You really want to keep your core investment simple. If you've invested at all, or if you've been on any kind of investing class, or you watched shows about investing, or you've been to investing events, there's always at least one person who has the most ridiculous approach, and they have 1,000 things they're invested in, and they're like, "Oh, I'm constantly looking at these, and I spend 8 hours a day looking at different companies." And at the end of the year, they made $12. A little bit of an exaggeration, but you don't want to have a massive portfolio, meaning you don't want to have 1,000 different investments, a ton of different stocks in your portfolio, because there's no reason to do that. For one, there's no benefit to say that the more stocks you have or the more investments you have will increase your chances. We're not playing the lottery here and trying to pick as many numbers as we can. That's not what this is. You're much better off having a focused portfolio, a smaller portfolio, and investing in things that you have conviction about. So, like I said, you can have, for example, a good approach is you'll have three ETFs. And if you missed what an ETF was, we'll have this recording posted so you can go back and get that info as well. But let's say you have three ETFs. You can have one that is tech. Again, that's going to have probably the highest gains, but it also usually has the most volatility. Your second ETF could be, let's say, a green energy ETF. So they have ETFs that have a bunch of solar companies, renewable energy, all that kind of stuff. And then your third one could be an energy ETF. So again, that'll have things like oil in there, more stable things that do produce gains over time, but a little bit more slowly than maybe the tech one would. And let's say you just had those three and you invested in those three every single month. On those ETFs, they're going to have an option when you're on your brokerage, and there's a little box that you click and it says reinvest dividends. And again, a dividend is when either a company or an ETF, an index fund, whatever it is, when they perform really well, the investors get a little piece of whatever their gains were for that quarter, that year, that month, however they set theirs up. And when you reinvest those dividends, I don't have time to get into this. It's a little more complex, but when you reinvest the dividends, that increases your gains by so much. And the more you invest, the more you get in dividends. So let's say I invested $1,000 and the dividend for $1,000 investment was 20 bucks. You're like, 20 bucks doesn't really help. But when I reinvest that dividend, I now have $1,020 invested. And let's say the next month, let's say they do it every month. That next month, when they give me dividends, they're going to be giving me a dividend based on $1,020. So let's say that gives me let's say that gives me $21 as an investment. So the next month, I have $1,041 that it's going to give me a dividend on. And that's not, of course, including me adding more and more to my own investments, but you can see how that creates a positive cycle for you because as it reinvests the dividends, it's giving you more money on the dividend that they gave you. So it's essentially free money. And I hate that term, but that's the best way I can phrase it. It's essentially free money, and then they give you more free money for the free money that they gave you the last time. So that's another way that you can really speed up the compounding of your investment is when you reinvest dividends. I do that with all of mine that I can. If that's ever an option, immediately clicking yes. Um, because I mean, what am I going to do with $20 a month? Nothing. Especially in California, that buys one lunch. So if I can have it work for me rather than contribute to a dad bod, that's what I'm going to do. So I don't want to get too far into ETFs or the dividend reinvestment, but I at least wanted to touch on why that's important to do. So again, if you have an option to reinvest dividends, I can't stress enough to please do so. It will be incredibly beneficial for your investing portfolio. It's an excellent choice. So to pivot a little bit from investments, uh, I know a lot of people have concerns and they say, well, going back to the $25 a month, they say, I don't really have a lot to invest right now. Again, totally fine. You need to start where you are. I get it. Um, One thing though that is a concern for a lot of people is debt that they carry. And you've heard all kind of stories, I'm sure, about people doing uh, debt clearance where they employ all kind of crazy strategies. There's a group of people that just got prosecuted because they did a debt clearance because they claimed to the credit bureaus that they had been kidnapped when they were younger and they were essentially held in captivity, and so none of those debts were there and all kind of other stuff. It got the debt cleared, but then they can never claim bankruptcy, and I think they ended up going to jail. So you hear all kind of crazy strategies where people try to get out of the debt. We're not talking about those today. We're going to cover some pretty basic ways to do it, things that work in real life and will keep you out of jail. Um, but these go hand in hand with investing. And I'll say one more thing before we get into the actual material for the debt consolidation and clearing your debt. There are two trains of thought when it comes to paying off debt and investing. There are some people who say you should only pay the minimums for your debt payments or maybe slightly above the minimums for your debt payments. So let's say you have a credit card and the minimum payment's $115. They say you should only pay $120. Um, and with the rest of the money that you have available to spend, that should go into investing because the percentage that you get back on your investments, it covers and exceeds what you would be paying in interest on your debt. So there's that camp of people that have that approach. There is another train of thought where people say you should not have debt before you start investing. So your debt should be at zero or as close as you can get it to zero. And the thought process behind that is if you have $1,000 worth of payments every month going to debt, whether it's credit cards, car loans, personal loans, whatever that looks like, that's $1,000 a month that you can't invest because you're paying on other things. So there's the camp of people that say you should pay off all of your debt again or as close as you can before you start investing because you're in a better position financially. I'm not going to say either is wrong. I'm not going to say one is better. It truly is just what works for you in your situation. I know there are some people who just don't like to have debt hanging over their heads. And let's say they may have been laid off at some point. They may have had some big medical issue that put them in debt, whatever that looks like. They just want to get that taken off the table, get it cleared, and then they can have kind of a clean slate to invest. If that's where you're at, totally fine. Nothing wrong with that. If you want to be a little bit more aggressive, you can use the strategy where people start to invest and make investments while they still have debt on the table. Again, neither one is wrong, neither one is better across the board. It is truly dependent on what your situation is and what your approach is and what your comfort level is. But one of the ways that you can help with your debt um, is by doing debt consolidation. I will say this can be really, really, really beneficial for a couple of reasons. One, it simplifies your payments. It puts all of your payments into one. So let's say you have $15,000 worth of credit card debt and a personal loan altogether on, let's say, five different lines. So you have four credit cards and a personal loan, all totaling $15,000. If you do a debt consolidation loan, that'll combine all of those into one payment. So they'll give you $15,000. You pay off all those lines. And then once you do that, you have that one payment that you're making every month. And the personal loans, usually the interest rate or the APR, whatever it is, however they have it set up, is almost always lower than whatever debt you just consolidated. So of course, that's what you're looking for. You don't want to get another loan that's higher interest than what you just moved it from. So the point is to have a loan that has a lower interest rate. It makes it easier because it combines everything into one payment. And it makes it better for you long term because you're not paying so much interest. So more of your money is going towards the principal balance and getting rid of that debt. Um, and there are a lot of companies, there are a lot of banks, credit unions are a great way to go for consolidation loans because they usually offer lower interest rates. Um, but with the consolidation loans, the one I would say risk is you have to be really, really disciplined because, again, going back to my example with that $15,000, they'll give you that $15,000. You're not required to pay off the debt. They don't tell you what to do with it. It just gets deposited to your account. So there is going to be a temptation to take that money and not do what you intended to do with it. Terrible decision because now you have all that $15,000 worth of debt on your credit cards and personal loan, and now you have another $15,000 worth of debt on a consolidation loan. So you put yourself in a really bad position. Secondly, the other temptation that comes is once you take that money, let's say you pay off all your credit cards and you pay off that personal loan, now all your credit cards are at zero. And so your thought could be, well, I'll just purchase this. Let me just throw this on the credit card. And then 6 months later, you're right back where you were when you got that consolidation loan. So that's one reason why some people don't recommend debt consolidation because it does take discipline to make it work. It can be really beneficial. It can do wonders for your financial situation and help you pay things off more quickly and with less interest, but you really, really, really have to be disciplined. So that is an option. I don't want to get into other debt payoff strategies because they're a little bit riskier, a little bit more complex, and a lot of them require you to do multiple steps involving multiple people, sometimes other companies. So this is the one, if people tell me they have a ton of debt and they want to make an immediate impact, this is usually my recommendation. But again, I do stress the fact that it does take discipline because you have to make sure you're not running those credit cards right back up because then you'll be in a worse position than you were before you got the loan. So something to consider. Now, we already covered the other slide, so I don't want to take more time on that. Now, I want to also talk about some steps that you can take. So, like we mentioned earlier, and this is great if you have a job and they have investment options for you. One of the easiest ways to do it is just investing directly through your retirement account through your job. Oftentimes those investments that they offer are not the best. They don't offer the best returns, but they usually give some sort of tax incentive. So they'll let you invest pre-tax. or depending on what vehicle you use to invest, it may be post-tax, whatever works for you. But it usually has tax benefits that you can take advantage of when you invest directly through your job. Obviously, it's the easiest because it comes directly out of your check as soon as you're paid. You don't have to worry about it. You're not having to make the decision whether or not you want to invest for the month. Um, so that's probably the easiest way. Again, like we talked about earlier, if maybe that's not an option or you want to have investments that have better returns, you can look into ETFs and use that as your investment vehicle. That's an extremely good option. Um, but none of this works without some sort of budget, though. And I know people hate this subject uh, because budgeting is not fun. Um, but I can guarantee you that every single one of us, if we were to sit down and do a to the dollar budget for our monthly income and outflow, we would be appalled at the foolishness that we spend so much money on every single month. Um, and the reason that reality check is needed, the reason that's necessary is because you'll see when you say, "Oh, I don't have money for investing," or "I don't have extra money to pay a little extra on my debt every month." Overwhelming chance you really do. And we're just not spending it in the most beneficial way. Um, so if depending on what everybody wants to do and what your own comfort level is, if we do more classes, we may be able to get into easy ways to set a budget and to go through it so it doesn't take 17 days for you to do. It doesn't stress you out. So we may be able to get into that if we do additional classes. Um, Other ways to invest, you can invest in real estate. Again, that does take some learning and some effort on your part, though. That's not something that I would recommend in any way, shape, or form for you to just jump into. But it is a good, solid vehicle of investment. Um, and then one of the other things, again, this one's a little bit more complex, so I didn't want to dive into it in this class, but there are ways to take advantage of a lot of tax benefits and estate basics. So you've heard about trusts, you've heard about having a living will, having estates, all those sorts of things. A lot of those are for tax protection, so you keep more of your money. And it also helps if you're trying to pass things down to children. They're not having to pay 30, 40% tax on what you're passing down. So those are really good ways as well. So we can get into that in our next class if we have the demand for it. But the reason I wanted to put this slide up is because I wanted to show that there are multiple options and it is not difficult to do. Um, you just really have to discipline yourself and set targets. Make sure you're contributing consistently. Again, whatever that looks like. If you do that every week, incredible. If every 2 weeks you do it on your paycheck, that's great. If you want to do it once a month, that's great as well. But you just have to make sure you're consistent. And again, the biggest thing you can do is to start. Nothing happens if you never start. Um, if you're worried about money and you don't see how you're going to get to your retirement in 20 years, but you don't do anything, it's like worrying about your weight, but not wanting to change how you eat or how you exercise. Um, you're not going to see results because you're not putting in the work. Um, so investing is the same way. I mean, it's really just something you have to start. And, you know, if you're just getting into it, you're not going to have the most comfortability with what you're doing. You're probably not going to have the best results because you're brand new, but that's okay. We don't care about that. We just need everybody to start. That is by far the most important thing. And I'm going to say it one last time. Time in the market is absolutely king. The longer you can be invested in things, the better your results are going to be. That cannot be overstated. Um, so that's a kind of a high level overview. And next, we can talk about a little bit more detail on how to plan. So, just a couple easy steps. If you don't have them already, if you don't have one already, open an investment account. Some of the big companies, the banks have investment accounts you can open. You can use Charles Schwab. They're a really big one. They just merged with TD Ameritrade last year. So they have a lot of offerings, a lot of products. Again, if you already bank with one of the big banks, they usually offer investment options for you as well in some way, or they're connected to a broker that you can invest with. So I don't want to give specific recommendations on what you should do, but those are some options. And then once you open that account, pick one ETF to start with. You don't have to pick three. If you can pick three, that gives you a little bit better of a position to be in, but you'll start with one. Pick an ETF that you want to invest in. And if you don't know what an ETF to invest in, totally understandable. They'll have people that you can talk to say, "Hey, I'm a first-time investor. What is a good option for me?" And they're a financial advisor, so they'll be able to give specific recommendations. And then once you invest in that ETF, you just set it as a recurring investment. So again, whatever that investment schedule looks like, if it's every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever you can start with, just start. And do not think about what the person on the other line is on the other side of the line or the other side of the chat is thinking. If you start with $10 a month, who cares? It doesn't matter. You're starting, and that's what's important. Um, Again, I said one last time, but I'm going to say it one last time. Time in the market is king. There is nothing that beats time in the market at all, ever in the history of ever. Time in the market is king. So the sooner you can get started, the better it is for you. And of course, as you continue to invest, you just increase what you're contributing to your investment account every month. You get a little bit more familiar with what you're investing in. You get a little bit more familiar with what your returns are. You kind of see what works and what doesn't. Um, but again, you can't do any of that unless you start. So having that kind of snowball worth of gains as you start a snowball at the top of the hill and it's small and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as you go down the hill. I want you to picture that as your start to investing. You might start with a little itty bitty snowball, but as it gets rolling down the hill of time, it's going to continue to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. Um, so with that being said, I want to give time for questions because I know there is a little bit more detail in this lesson versus the last, and there are all new concepts in this lesson. So I'm going to stop there and allow time for questions. So if you want to come off mute, or if you want to put it in the chat. So I do see a question in the chat. It says, when is it, when is too old to invest? 70 or 80 years old? There's never a time or an age that's too old to invest. I mean, of course, if you're starting at 80, 90 years old, you're not going to have all of the gains that somebody would if they started at 18, but some gains are better than no gains. And so, I'm sure a lot of people, once they hit that age range, they start thinking about what they can leave to their kids. And so, if you can, right now, let's say you just using my super generic number, let's say you have $1,000 to leave to your kids. If you can turn that $1,000 into $3,000 over the next 5 years, would you not want to do that? Yes, of course. So I would say there is never an age that you should consider not investing. Having that benefit, having those gains come in always beats having no investment and no gains. So again, the biggest thing to do is just to start. You can't see any of the benefit and experience any of the success if you never begin. So excellent question. Thank you. Anybody else have questions? Maybe it was about the debt consolidation piece, maybe about the ETF portion, or if you had questions about our first class where we talked about credit and utilization, now would be the time. All right, excellent. So no questions. I'll give myself kudos if that means I taught it really well. Um, could be wrong, but I'm just gonna make myself feel better. Um, So, like I said, this class is going to be posted. We'll also have our first class posted. So, if you missed either of them, or maybe some of it, or if you just wanted to go back over the information, they will be available next week. So, you'll see a post when those go up. And we may, if we have more demand for these classes, we may be able to add a couple more on. So if there's something that you can think of that you would like to learn, let me know. Or if you're talking to your family and friends and there's something that they want to learn outside of our first two classes, please let me know. This is a great way to introduce people to finance and hopefully lower some of the barriers of entry for people and allow them to realize it's not as difficult as they may think that it is. So, with that being said, I appreciate everybody taking the time today. Hope you all have a great rest of the weekend, and we will see you soon.